What's happening, friends? Welcome back for another episode of the Chamber Podcast. My name is Rob Johnson, and joining me in the studio today is my new friend, John Sellek.
Hello.
What's happening, my friend?
I'm having a good time already. We didn't even start yet.
Well, good deal. So, John, you are from Harbor Strategic Public Affairs, and we are going to get into all of the things that you do and also talk a little bit of politics at the end, but it's not going to be heated.
That's right.
We'll see how it goes. No, but I think what's really unique about, when I was reading your guys' profile and everything that you're doing, there's a lot of different levers that you can pull in the political, public affairs, public relations space. And just like anything else, there's a lot of different compartments to it. So it's not just one big machine. It's one big area with a lot of sub machines running in that. So I guess, John, for the folks at home, let's just do like a 60-second elevator pitch background of who you are, then we'll dive in more from there.
See, but you're asking me the same thing my mom is still asking me after all this time. What do you do?
Yeah.
And nobody knows.
I hear you. My mom's like, podcasts? What the hell are those?
Yeah. I spent a career working in state government, in the legislature, and in politics and statewide campaigns for governor, president, all that good stuff. I worked in policy shop for a governor, so I've kind of like done it all. And in the political world downtown, and when I say political world, I don't mean just campaigns, but what happens between the governor's office and the legislature and the courts and how the media covers all that stuff. It's pretty unique. And I was just explaining to my son the other day, 16, the rest of the world has PR machine that covers the whole state, and they do a wide gamut of, book tours and announcements and ribbon cuttings. And what we do covers like a circle of like 6 blocks in downtown Lansing. And somehow that keeps us more than busy because that world is always churning.
Yeah. Well, between every 2 to 6 years, you have, a flurry of different elections, different players, and not only just people that are elected, but, the people that are on those teams and the people
Right.
that are, put into those positions by whether it's, the governor or reps or people that have, the ability to, nominate people and put them in positions. So, yeah, it's always changing.
Yeah, it's wild. So like right now, for example, the legislature and the governor are in heated negotiations trying to figure out how to finish the budget before they can go out and campaign for the summer. And all sides need to go out and campaign. The governor, the legislature, Republicans, Democrats, they all do, because one thing about campaigns is time is actually the most valuable thing. We always talk about money and all these other things, which are important, but there's a deadline and it ends every single time. The only thing I can usually compare it to is like a tax accountant. There's tax day, but even they can file for an extension. In politics, you can't. So you got to work backwards from election day. And all the time that they spend in Lansing debating, arguing, shoving stuff at each other means less time for them to go out and make their case to the voters why they are the right ones to be returned to power. So they're itching to get this budget deal done right now. It's been complicated by all the COVID dollars that are sitting in Lansing right now. There's literally billions of extra dollars sitting there that they're fighting over. Do we give it back on tax breaks? Do we do a combination of that and fixing the roads and other policies? So that's what's going on there. But at the same time, I have a lot of clients who have legislation up in the legislature, and they need public relations help to help explain it not only to the legislators, but to their constituents about why should they vote yes or no on issue X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a really big part of your role, is ensuring it's like anything else. Like if you know something exceptionally well, you should be able to explain it at a relatively simple level. And
unless my mom's asking me what I do, and then
exactly right. Then it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Just reread what I texted you.
Right.
And when you get into that position of, taking complex public policy and distilling it to voters so they can understand it, like that is an art. That is a communicative, art form that a lot of people haven't mastered. Politicians haven't mastered, which is why, like, whenever I enter in the political consulting world for marketing, it makes my job super easy, because not all we need to do, but like the main gist of what you have to do is be a person that is representing the people that are in your constituency and articulating those ideas in a way they can understand.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, authenticity fits right in the middle of that. That's really important. But
Right.
We've also entered a zone where politics has become more and more polarized. It used to be, at least when I always worked from a statewide level, you had to look at the whole map. You were going to pull some from the right, some from the left, and then you had to grab whatever you could out of the middle and make that thing. Politics right now, it's getting to the point where the middle is pretty tiny. There's a lot of people that don't want to identify with either party, and they feel like they're in the middle, but they really are at their heart. They're a Republican conservative, or they're a liberal Democrat progressive.
Sure.
And they get frustrated with that brand, and they don't want to put that brand on themselves. So they don't feel like they're part of those parties. But there's fewer and fewer people to recommend things to and try to convince them on. Instead, a lot of times now, unfortunately, you're speaking to the block of people that are already in your boat and you're just trying to activate them.
Mm. So for Harbor Strategic, how does that work when you get into those, the decisions of what side of the aisle do you sit on? Do you represent both sides? Is it policy dependent? How does that look like for you?
Yeah. When you enter politics, you do have to pick one party or the other. So you're going to work, if you work in the legislature, you're going to work for a Republican member of the legislature or a Democrat. There's one way or the other. My first job was working for a governor, and the governor was Republican at the time. I was essentially center-right conservative. My family was that way. And those things become more intensified over time. But when I decided that I was going to follow my entrepreneurial yearnings that I had my whole life, my dad had his own business. My grandma was one of the first female realtors in the Lansing area where I grew up. I finally got to follow that, and I wasn't going to be beholden by those things. I was going to work more on policy. But the other part that's interesting is I had to really think about how I got there. I worked for 2 Michigan attorneys general in a row, the previous 2 before Dana Nessel, Mike Cox and Bill Schuette. And when you're working in that office, attorneys general do 2 things. They are the lawyers for the state of Michigan. So if you got into a scrap with the Department of Treasury on your taxes or the DNR because you did something wrong when you were out hunting or whatever, they're the attorneys for those folks, but they're also the attorney for the, quote, the people. And that means they're out defending people who are victims of crimes like sexual assault or sexual trafficking, a whole wide range of issues where survivors needed to be defended. And the biggest issue that had a huge impact on me toward the end of Attorney General Schuette's realm was what happened at Michigan State with the gymnast and Larry Nassar. Thankfully, he's in prison. The Supreme Court just ruled again they're tired of hearing from him. He's going to stay there. But that really set me on a path going forward where I have, as strong as my business leanings are, and I do a lot of things on the business side. I work with a ton of chambers of commerce on a number of issues we can talk about. But where I really get excited, where the competition of politics used to get me going, now the sort of competition of defending people who need help is really big. So, for example, I was on the PR side of basically 1,100 former athletes at the University of Michigan who said that they were sexually assaulted by the team medical doctor over decades, mostly on the football team, but there was hockey, basketball, and it was even more unusual because it was men finally coming forward. Both men and women both get assaulted, but men, for whatever reason, on the culture side or whatever, haven't been as comfortable coming out. It's certainly not easy when you're a woman either. But that was nearly all men, and that was a unique situation. And so I've tended to take on a lot of cases like that too.
That seems like a large undertaking. So when you made the decision to go into the entrepreneurial world, what was it like to build that structure to be able to support and help all those people, whether it was, athletes from Michigan State or just, the general public on those policy issues?
It's really hard to separate and live a 9-to-5 life. That doesn't exist, first of all, as you know, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a business owner. I heard somebody else on one of your podcasts say they couldn't wait to set their own hours. And I think we did. They're 24 hours, 7 days a week. Yep. We're doing something. Yep. In my sleep, I'm dreaming about this stuff. Like it's always going.
Yeah.
And so an example on that front would be, I have a group of clients who are parents of students at Oxford High School.
Okay.
And they are not on a 9-to-5 schedule when they are thinking about their battles to make sure that school will be safe enough for their kids to want to be there next year.
Yeah.
So they're texting, talking, calling all the time. So it's essentially, I thought I would set structures, but really it's a 24/7 endeavor all the time. And when someone you're working with is operating on an issue that deeply struck them emotionally, it's not the same as, a business opening or a policy thing where we know there's a set date for a committee hearing and we're going to prepare for that committee hearing, make sure people are ready to testify at the committee hearing, make sure the media is aware that the committee hearing is going to happen, all that good stuff. Some of these situations, especially when lawsuits are involved, the media wants to talk about it. The media wants to talk about Oxford all the time. This week, I already set up 2 interviews live on CNN and 1 on Fox in the last 2 days. So those things aren't on your agenda when you get up in the morning, but they come and you just have to make it fit. And that just means you work longer and longer. And so when I offered my 16-year-old son to come and intern for me this year, the first thing he said was, "Oh my God, no, I'll be working all summer."
Yeah. Yeah. You can't give them the dad 10 to 4 Monday through Thursday schedule. You're going to do an intern. You're going to do a proper one.
Yeah, that's right.
An internship,
Hopefully it's teaching them a good lesson.
Absolutely.
But those are the kind of things where when you were in politics and you knew the election day was coming and you were in this full-on battle with the opponent, that same competitive feeling. And now I can add on to because now I look back at politics and I'm a little cynical about it. You can add where your heart matters. And like, when you worked too long, you didn't see your son, as early as you wanted to in the day, you were doing something that really mattered. And that makes it a heck of a lot easier to stay up late, get up early, not sleep.
100%. Yeah. So I want to pause here, and I want to go into, so we have a recurring segment on the show where I'd kind of dive a little bit more into your personal background. You've listened, so the questions are not going to be a surprise. And then after we finish that, I wanted to dive a little bit more into kind of the political ongoings here in Michigan.
Sure.
What is on the docket for the summer and the fall as we head into November. So first things first. So how long have you been in, whether it's on the political circle or as a entrepreneurial consultant? How long have you been in that world?
I started my business in 2017, so that's when I finally got it rolling, but it's something I had been dreaming about doing for a really long time. But politics and communications and the legislature, that's what I was doing right after I came out of Michigan State. So well over 25 years now.
Okay.
And my dad had dabbled in politics and been on a township board when I was growing up, so we were going door to door handing out flyers and all that for a really long time. Ironically, or not ironically, when I was a kid, I loved reading Time Magazine, U.S. News, New York Times. I wanted to be involved in international politics, like back then the Cold War, Soviet Union.
Sure.
That dominated my thoughts, and certainly I pay attention to foreign affairs. But somewhere along the way, I got my first job working on a governor's campaign. It was for John Engler when he was running for re-election in 1994. So that makes me sound really old, but I was in college, and that just shot me right over onto the state, local political world.
Okay. So going back, the 25 years or so to when you first started, what's some advice that you might give to somebody as they're embarking on that same journey?
Yeah, I usually say two things. First, go to college if you're going to go to college and get a real degree that you can get a real job with that has nothing to do with politics. Get an accounting degree, get like an actual skill set that you can fall back on or still do, because politics is what you mostly learn in real life when you're working on campaigns. People who got political science degrees, basically like I did, I was James Madison at Michigan State, big time, like I can quote Nietzsche and I can talk about Karl Marx, and
Sure.
I can't really do anything with that. My kids aren't going to listen to me, so I'm not like totally poo-pooing it. Great education. But almost everything I learned about real life politics happened because I went and joined a campaign and I volunteered. And so finding a cause or an effort, whether it's a candidate or an issue. Right now, we've got a lot of issues going on. On the conservative side, they're showing up at school boards and fighting about what's being taught in schools. On the progressive side, but into the middle as well, the abortion issue has come up, and there's so many different opportunities to volunteer and be part of a cause. And you're not going to make any money doing it at first, but it's the experience you get that and the networking that you do that allows you to get to the next levels. That's what happened for me, and that's typically what happens for people that get into the political legislative world.
Okay. Very good. Now on the second question here, so obviously, you mentioned, running and gunning 24/7 is generally the hours of operation. What is a hobby or two that you have?
When I stop and think about it, I used to watch TV, and I don't do that anymore. There's not a lot of time for any of those things. But my wife and I just passed our 7th anniversary of moving to Brighton.
Okay.
She was from Wayne County. I was from Lansing. We had to pick a place somewhere in the middle. It's not something I had ever imagined I was going to end up living in a place like Brighton, and we absolutely love it. Just being here alone, when I get out of Lansing and come home at night, when she comes from her job and we're at home, when we're down on Main Street, and we go enjoy the amazing restaurants and bars and places that we have here to go shopping at on Main Street. Couldn't love and feel more relaxed when I get back home. Yeah. I'm sure if you're here all day, we think Grand River Avenue is insane, but as soon as I get here, even if I'm not stopping anywhere, I like to drive down Main Street and check out what's going on. I love to read, and luckily I never considered myself as living in the country, and I'm sure people here don't think we do, living right in Brighton, but I feel that way when I'm here, so I really enjoy doing that. And then we have 4 kids, so we're doing sports all the time, and so that's what we're focused on.
Excellent. And lastly, when you look at obviously all of the opportunities in the technology field for what you do on the political consulting side, if you had to pick your favorite piece of technology, whether it was for business or personal, what would it be?
I have 2 tools that I have with me all the time, and I have it right here. I have my iPhone Max 13 I just picked up last week at T-Mobile down here in Grand River. in my MacBook Pro. And I've always been somebody who was a little restless. So I love having an office. I'm productive when I get to the office, but I like to keep moving. I can't sit still really well. And so I have those two things with me all the time. If I'm at Brighton Coffee House working away, or at Two Brothers working away, or at Starbucks, I like to be on the move. So I'm totally dependent on those two things. And at the same time, they give me freedom that I couldn't imagine having. When I work for the state of Michigan, they expect you to actually, at least prior to the pandemic, show up for work every day and sit there. And so those two things for sure. I'll just say I completely geek out on what you do. When I walked in the front door here and I saw everybody working on their computers, TV, ad, radio production, content production, I get super geeked about that. That's not my first skill. Media relations is my thing, and strategy and messaging. Yeah. But I'm jealous of you.
No, it's super fun. We're pretty blessed to be able to do what we do. It's a pretty fun crew here. So looking at the agenda for the rest of this year, obviously elections coming up. There's been a lot of, I guess first things first, like it's always weird to me how quick the spin time is in the governor elections compared to the presidential elections. Because it seems like on the presidential side, we started debates, 4 years before we elected the last president. That's when the debates start. Right. But it just seems like now it's almost July. And, obviously the primaries are in August.
Yep.
And that gives us a very short window, until the election. It just seems like it's so close. And then there's been a lot of one of the biggest news stories is the ballot fraud, the signature frauds.
That's right.
And people like James Craig not being able to be on the ballot in August, and that's going to the Supreme Court. I don't know if that's when that's on the docket. And then obviously what we talked about at the front with the budget being decided and we're not being able to campaign quite yet, or having the tenets of the campaign for the reelection. There's a lot going on. So if someone was to get the Reader's Digest version of what is happening in Michigan politics ahead of the next election, what would you tell them?
Well, in one word, it's chaos, right? That kind of sums it up, basically. But I think you're right. At the presidential level, we've essentially entered into nonstop campaigning.
Yes.
Certainly with President Trump and the former President Trump and the microphone he has. Figuratively, he always is talking, and that's stirring up everyone. There's a bunch of Trump imitators who want to be him in case he doesn't run again. And then President Biden was selected, I think, by the people who made that swing in the middle, in the suburbs, that wanted to calm things down. The pandemic was out of control. Not anyone's particular fault, but how you handle it, how you talk about it. Could we please try to get back to living a little bit somehow? This has been hard, and I think in that sense, the bar didn't seem that high for President Biden, but the world keeps spinning out of control. So how do you get out of Afghanistan? Everybody wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but they didn't like the way he did it. And that's when his polling numbers started going down. Then we've had waves of COVID that upset people and drop back down. Then these other issues drop out of the sky, like the abortion issue and what the Supreme Court will do about that, whichever side that you're on. So many issues are flying around. But the number one issue, no matter what, that's affecting everybody and hurting President Biden and therefore those who are in his party is inflation.
Sure.
Right. And we don't have to talk a lot about that. We're all paying gas prices and we're looking at the costs of
everyone's
all those things.
Feeling it.
Yeah, everyone's totally feeling it. And so they're either generally fearful and worried or they're angry.
Right.
And when you go to the ballot and you want to blame, traditionally what happens, you blame the party in power, whether it's fair or not, because there's nothing fair in politics, really.
Right.
You would want to punish President Biden because he's in charge, but he's not on the ballot. So where the pain will come is from Governor Whitmer on down, whether she had a single thing to do with inflation or not, your name gets to be on the ballot. Timing is like almost everything in politics. So
sure.
That's the biggest hurdle that the Democrats face. And then on the Republican side, like you said, the reason it kind of feels like the primary is coming so quickly without any sort of forewarning is that the GOP has not been able to get its act together. They don't have a leading candidate to take on Governor Whitmer. There is no one GOP candidate that's already started the campaign versus Governor Whitmer. So she's gotten to hold the stage all to herself, which has its own issues because right now the campaign would look to be kind of a referendum on her and President Biden. What she now wants to see is somebody in the GOP get in so she can say, it's a comparison. It's a choice between two things, not just a choice about her. And
that's because largely with inflation, with just the state of what's happened in Michigan, through COVID and through, as we exit the pandemic, there's not a lot of accomplishments to point to say, hey, look, we've done this. And that's not necessarily 100% on her, but it is something to say, well, we haven't had really like a normal political season where like things could get done normally, you know.
Right. We haven't seen the story told about what is this governor's race about.
Right.
So instead, what it's about inflation and all the fear and frustration and bad feelings that are around it. At some point, because it has to happen on August 2nd, the GOP is going to select somebody to be the nominee. And, you know, the number one person in the latest poll only had 17%. So,
And who would you think right now is going to be the nominee, if you had to guess?
really hard to tell, but money does matter a lot, even though we said time is everything in politics. And so does circumstance. So once James Craig was off from the ballot, he'll be something to study and write books about. For the GOP, he had things that the GOP almost never has. And the number one part is a footprint in Southeast Michigan.
Yep.
We don't usually have GOP nominees who lead with name ID and favorable ratings. And James Craig not only had that, he had it bigger than people thought. So he had been leading the GOP race for a year since he got in, based on his strength in Southeast Michigan. The other candidates were basically fighting over, and that's where like basically half the votes are. Yep. The other candidates were fighting over the rest of the state, trying to figure out how to assemble enough votes to counter James Craig. So once you lopped him off the ballot, suddenly it was kind of a free-for-all. The second candidate who got knocked off, Perry Johnson, was the biggest spender. He says he spent $7 million. That's a bad return on investment. He got kicked off the ballot because of bad petition signatures. Yeah. So now we're left with a lot of candidates who don't have very much money to give themselves a platform and talk. So the one that does have money and continues to spend is named Kevin Rinke. He was a car dealer, other business types. He hasn't really moved way up. So there's a question about his messaging. He's trying to mostly position himself to win a general. So he's trying to talk Trump issues and trying not to act Trump and follow the MAGA lane. And there are others in the race like Garrett Soldano, Ryan Kelly, who are following more of that MAGA lane. The wild card really would be at this point currently is Ryan Kelly, and it's simply because of the crazy world we live in. He elevates to the front probably for two reasons. One, in Michigan, we use a lot of Irish surnames for judicial races. We always have Kavanaughs and Kellys. We had an attorney general named Frank Kelly for 37 years. So that's a name that seems sort of recognizable, like, oh, Ryan Kelly, don't I know that guy?
Yeah.
And then because of the insanity of the world that we live in right now, getting raided by the FBI for your attendance at the January 6th proceedings helps elevate you in the GOP primary. So that's lifted him up a little bit. But the other person we didn't talk about is Tudor Dixon. She's gotten all the endorsements from the traditional strongholds in the GOP, so like the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, Right to Life, and the DeVos family. Too, yeah. That's right, yeah. And what that usually will translate into is some assistance with money, because everybody that's seen her thinks she has a lot of political talent. She was a newscaster, and she's got great communication skills. She just hasn't had the funding to be up on a platform where people could see her. But that's really the case for all of them right now, other than Kevin Rinke.
Yeah. Do you think Craig has any chance to write in?
No.
Yeah.
That's the shortest answer I gave you today. Sorry.
No, it's fine. And I would agree, but it's a very common talking point right now. And I think what people are just missing out is, like it or not, there is a not a majority, but a large amount of voters that vote with just limited name recognition knowledge. Mm-hmm. And you can't count on write-in to get it done, especially in something as big as a gubernatorial primary.
Yeah, you know as well as anybody, you're a marketer. The competition for attention is astronomical.
Yep.
Right? Even I get trapped sitting there, oh, I'm on Instagram. Oh, I'm getting bored of this. I flip over to TikTok, right? And then an hour and a half went by and I didn't see any political ads. The other thing is there's an element in politics right now where folks just like to be in the game. That's always sort of been there, but because you can have social media and you can kind of generate your own thing with little money, it seems like some of these folks, and it appears for James Craig, he has no chance to win on a write-in campaign. He just doesn't want to leave the stage. And that's Perry Johnson has talked about a write-in campaign as well. All of this has left Governor Whitmer to like sort of be shadowboxing. She's trying to tell her own message of here's all the things I did do well. You said earlier it's almost not fair. When she ran and won, I had worked for Bill Schuette, who lost to her, just to clarify that. But her main issue of saying I was going to fix the damn roads drove her to victory, in addition to a good Democrat year. Then the pandemic hit, and she really couldn't make a whole lot of progress on trying to fix the roads for that reason and some of the taxation issues. And in the polling for 2 years during the pandemic, as you'd expect when we were all like, wow, are we going to survive as the human race? The roads issue fell. We weren't driving anywhere. We weren't going to work. The minute the pandemic felt like it was alleviating in the polls, suddenly the road issue shot back up to the top. And it's impossible to fix Michigan's roads. So when you make that as your bet to win in the first place, you know it's going to be hard to deliver on. And so she's struggling with that issue right now. But the rest of the time, she's out there able to tell her own message, and she has more money than any non-self-funding candidate has ever had in her bank account. So she's not going to have a problem telling her story that she wants to tell, but it would help, I think, probably if there was an actual person to compare herself to, so it's not just a referendum on her, for her strategy.
So fast forward to the election. One, who are the two people going to be in the dance? We obviously know one of them, and who's going to win?
Yeah, right now, based on my past experience and those endorsements we talked about earlier, I would be surprised if it's not Tudor Dixon in the end. The fact that the race is so wide open right now, and that only one of the other candidates in the race has money that he's spending on his own, and he's been spending and hasn't elevated himself to first place already. The path for her, if she does get the funding to put herself on television, to put herself on digital and tell her story, is probably going to elevate her pretty well. The January 6 hearings and the FBI raid on Ryan Kelly, that is an effect on the race that nobody predicted whatsoever. And we have to see how that plays out. We've just literally never seen it where somebody gets raided and charged with a crime, and they not only don't drop out, they go to the first level in the race. They're in first place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's somewhat, in my opinion, I think that's somewhat skewed. I don't think there's no longevity in that, in my opinion, but we'll see.
I think you're right. But also the other candidates then have to seize on that opportunity.
And they're not. And that's my problem. That was my problem with Bill Schuette when he was running, no offense, I know you were a part of that. But it was just a lack of directness towards people and a hard enough contrast. And, he had my vote, but it was a vote against Whitmer and not one for him.
I see.
If I am just speaking plainly, as I usually do. So, and that's the thing with me. Like, I vote on both sides of the aisle, so like I'm the definition of politically independent because I don't really have a dog in the fight, and I'm very policy driven. So it's an interest. Yeah. The whole thing's interesting. We can sit here and talk for 4 hours and I'd love it.
Probably so. But, well, like you talked about for 2018, Bill Schuette would have been the third term of Rick Snyder in most people's minds. And we don't really elect third terms. George H.W. Bush got a third term off Reagan. Sure. We don't really see that happen too often. The winds weren't blowing that way. Michigan elected 3 women for the first time ever to all statewide offices, all Democrats, all essentially center left, if not all the way progressive like Attorney General Nessel is. That was the tide that Schuette was facing. And now every indicator would say that Governor Whitmer is going to lose because the whole world is against her. She could do every single thing right by traditional standards, and she sort of is lately, and still lose to almost a nobody because of what's happening in the bigger picture above her. Politics are more nationalized than they've ever been, and it's not going to get any better because of digital media. All those messages filter their way down. She's caught in that mess. And then, fair or not, like we said earlier, politics isn't fair. She had to handle the pandemic, and she made a lot of choices, and a lot of people, mom and pop businesses, are gone and will never come back. Yeah. And when you bring up some of these decisions, like you could walk into Meijer and you could get milk, but you couldn't get seeds. Now what we know, you're like, wait, what? Yeah. And so especially in our restaurant world, our restaurant and lodging world still is just obliterated and trying to fight their way back, as an example. And those decisions are still going to stick. And we're going to end up seeing a lot of people on the air who either were frustrated about not being able to visit people in nursing homes because of the choices that were made, or lost loved ones that were sent to nursing homes where COVID was also sent on purpose. And then the mom and pop businesses who are just gone, even probably some from here who can go on the air. I lost everything. And why? It wasn't necessary. Look what we know now. That wasn't necessary. So that battle's coming. Yep. But in the meantime, that pressure has been sort of like dropped onto the legislature. So I think because there's not a leading GOP candidate carrying on that messaging war, the legislature has been having to carry on that war, and they didn't need any help fighting each other, Whitmer and the legislature. Yep. But that's why you see these almost identical tax bills keep getting sent over to the governor, and she keeps vetoing them. They're carrying that message of, you need to be more conservative, and we know you're not. Stop acting like you're middle of the road. That's their claim. Yeah. So I do think Governor Whitmer right now, if the election was today, would actually be in a decent place because she's been able to craft her own message and say, you may not like everything I did, but overall I'm pretty steady, I'm pretty calm. Are you really going to elect Ryan Kelly?
Right. And that's the thing too, like from the legislative perspective, it's smart to keep going after those runs because that's what people need. They need the assistance. They need help. They need laws that actually work for businesses. And every time they get vetoed, that's just another lever to pull. Yeah. Town halls are going to be interesting. I'll tell you that.
And so will the debates. Once we have TV debates, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I'll be there. So. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate all the time and giving us a rundown on the forecast for, the election. So it feels like it's right around the corner, even though it's a ways off, but it's coming quickly, and for me it's gonna be super fast because there's no definition in it yet. Mm-hmm. Nothing is set, so it'll be super cool.
So you're going to leave your TV on and your phone on, but everyone else probably should just shut them off because it's coming. Governor Whitmer just announced yesterday that her ads are going to start, or this morning, it seems like that it was yesterday. So we're going to get rolling here, and the national money that's going to roll in here is going to be here. Yep. And frankly, if Governor Whitmer wins, she is automatically seen as one of the possible replacements for President Biden. Yep. If he chooses not to run again. And I know a lot of my GOP people go, what did you just say? But that's absolutely what will happen. She was nearly chosen for vice president. The current vice president's polling numbers are absolutely in the tank, worse than Biden's. It's going to be kind of an open window, and the Democrats are looking at who's in the next generation, especially female, that can come forward and run for president, and that's Gretchen Whitmer. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if Biden decides to swap out the VP for 2024.
Yeah, I think that is a tactic he could use to stay. Look, I've been around a lot of politicians, and Biden is certainly one of the last of the truly retail politicians. It's not in his nature to want to play I'm a far left progressive. That's what he's doing, whether it's his choice or his staff. It doesn't really matter. That's what he's doing on environment and global gases and all this stuff. But what drives him insane is that there's a bunch of people that don't like him. The newer generation of politics is like Governor DeSantis. He's like, I'm going to pick this group. I'm fully in with them, and I could give a rip less about what anyone else says. Actually, I'll enjoy being here, making you upset as I work for this group. Yeah. That's not Joe Biden. He doesn't want to do that. That's not
where he came from.
That's why he went out and got on his bike, because he's like, hey, I'm still normal. I'm out here. And then even that didn't go well for him.
Yeah, and that's the world he came from, and I think in my opinion, his biggest mistake was not running in 2016.
Yes, definitely, for sure. But the reason I bring all that up is I think he wants to stay president. There's no doubt in my mind. Few politicians want to walk away from power once they have it, and he wanted to be president for a long time. He ran several other times. Oh yeah, not 2016, and he should have. I think you're totally right about that. Timing is so important. Like Chris Christie should have ran in 2012 and beat Romney, who I worked for, and he didn't. He waited a couple years, and then he ended up in a disaster. Now he's just lucky to show up on Sunday on the talk shows, right? Yeah. So timing is so huge. But that tactic you bring up, one way to extend longevity might be, I'll swap out the vice president for something a lot stronger and somebody who can carry some water on television for me, and somebody that could be my heir apparent. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's a tough job, man. It's tough being governor. It's impossible being president. It's tough to do that. And, for whatever reason, Vice President Harris has had a really difficult time delivering it as a credible person. She's essentially been wiped off the map as far as the media is concerned.
Yeah. And it would be interesting because it would be very much a winds of change. We're going to take these next 4 years super serious by having a stronger hand at VP. But I don't think it's going to happen. But it'd be cool if it did. Just to see it.
Right, and that's why you couldn't be shocked that it will be a Midwestern governor. The Midwest is still a huge deal. It's what elected Donald Trump in the first place in 2016. Yeah. Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. And I'm sure there are plenty of strategic advisors out there who are thinking right now exactly what you're thinking. Yep. Boy, if we could swap out Harris and put in new storyline, fresh blood, younger generation, but somebody who's been elected and survived some battles in the Midwest where we need to win again to keep the presidency. Yeah,
I thought Klobuchar was the smart choice for him. Not that I'm trying to give that side free advice, but but I thought that would be a no-brainer, but apparently not. So what do I know? I just do podcasts.
You seem to be doing all right for yourself.
Cool. Well, I appreciate the time, man. Yeah. And we'll make sure we have everything linked up in the show. And that's going to wrap up this week's episode. So everyone, if you want to know more about John and his business, check out the show notes. All the information will be down there. I appreciate you all watching and listening. And remember, just because this episode didn't lean on the political side does not mean you can't go out and have